Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. Find out more about us at virginiainstitute.org. One of the great events that we put together every month is the Tuesday Morning Group Coalition, and our first two guests were just featured in our most recent Tuesday Morning Group Coalition meeting. They are attorney Matt Hardin, who you've heard on the program before, and radio show host, blogger, and former city councilor Rob Schilling, who you've also heard on the program before. Rob, good to hear from you again. How are you doing, sir?
Joe, it's a great day, and thank you so much for inviting us to come on with you.
I appreciate the fact that you can say it's a great day. And Matt Hardin, Matt, welcome back. How are you doing, sir?
Wonderful, Joe.
So this begins, and I think Matt was on the show earlier to kind of give us the thumbnail sketch of what happened on primary election day. And I find this interesting because I asked Senator Mark Warner, since people like you and me are always told, well, I've not seen any proof of voter fraud. I said, well, can you prove any vote suppression, since everyone on the left seems to be saying that any ID laws are akin to vote suppression or poll taxes? I said, can you show me somebody who was not allowed to vote, knowing darn well that Mark Warner wasn't going to say, hey, how about Rob Schilling when he wasn't at first allowed to vote on primary day? So, Rob, give us your story, the backstory on this. You went to vote in the Democratic Party primary in early June, right, the 6th?
Yes, this was, I believe, on June 8th, and I was exercising my right to vote in Virginia, as I enjoy doing and have for 23 years now that I've lived here in Virginia. And I would vote at the Woodbrook precinct here in Albemarle County. And I approached the Woodbrook precinct. There was almost nobody there. It was a very quiet morning. I think it was around 8:30 in the morning. And as I walked in, the very first thing that was said to me by the precinct chair, Leo Malik, was something to the effect of, you have to wear a mask in here. That's how I was greeted at the polls. And it kind of went downhill from there. But I was very concerned that my rights were being abridged immediately. I asked Mr. Malik, who, by the way, happens to be the husband of an elected Democrat supervisor here in Albemarle County, and he certainly knows who I am because he and I have interacted previously. I was discussing with him, asked him if I could film the interaction. I looked up from turning my camera on, and Mr. Malik's mask was off. It appears that he pulled it down to converse with me. When I brought that to his attention, Joe, he had a weird look on his face and then fled the building. So I started walking down the hall, and then there was what we call John Doe number 1, because we don't know his name yet, who ran down the hall and body blocked me and then put his hands on me, which I told him to take his hands off. I continued to walk down the hall. He was following me, I believe, and I walked in, and there was another man, John Doe number 2, who we have not yet identified, who said words to the effect of, we're going to go outside now. And I said, no, I'm here to vote. And then he put his hands on me. I was further delayed by about 4 or 5 minutes as they called into the county registrar's office to try to reach Jake Washburn, who is the Albemarle County registrar. One of his underlings confirmed to them that I was allowed to vote without wearing a mask in the Woodbrook precinct, as I had confirmed prior to voting there in November. And so I already knew what the answer was. But for anybody to be treated like this is absolutely outrageous when they're trying to exercise their right to vote. The people working there should be accommodating and helpful, and I should never be referred to as a problem as I was during this day. So that's the short of it, Joe.
Well, and there is two currents on this I'd like to explore. One, certainly, as we come back to school, and children may or may not be required to prove medical treatments have been done to them in order to attend their schools, whether it be at university level or even in the elementary schools. Offices are facing the same thing. But first, I want to ask, and maybe, Matt, you can jump in here on this. This is the most quiet Matt's been in years. Do you think this mask stuff was a false flag, that they knew who you were and they were trying to keep you from voting because you're a noted conservative voice, you've held elected office, and though they have no Virginia constitutional right to deny somebody in an open primary where we don't register by party, were they trying to suppress your vote because they were concerned that you weren't, quote, a member of the party?
I think that's very
Matt, I'm going to let you weigh in
suspicious.
on that first.
Okay.
Okay, sure. I think it's very suspicious. I think that it's one of the things we bring up in the lawsuit is this is a Democrat primary that Rob has a right to vote in under the statute, and the chief officer of the election is the spouse of an Albemarle County elected official who is familiar with Rob. Rob had confirmed ahead of time that no mask was necessary. He had voted in the past without a mask, and all of a sudden the mask becomes an issue on this one day, and such an issue that he's assaulted. So it's very suspicious, and it makes you wonder if the mask is really the issue or if there's something else at play. And I think one of the other things is if we're to believe that this is all to protect somebody from a virus, if these people are deathly afraid of the COVID that Rob might have been carrying, they wouldn't have wanted to get within 6 feet of him. And they certainly did get within 6 feet of him multiple times, including when they assaulted him. And I think that that's further evidence that they're not really concerned about a virus. They're not really concerned about masks. They're concerned about preventing somebody from voting.
Well, then, take us into this. Do we have any, and I guess this goes more into what's observable and not, anyone else who was denied voting because of mask? Have you been able to come up with any other corroborating, like, oh, yeah, that happened to me too, that was just what they were doing to everybody? Or is it what I would expect more likely to be nobody saying anything about that?
Well, I believe Rob's heard from at least 3 other people who faced similar problems. Nobody was assaulted as he was, but other folks faced the same problems, and Rob can say what he's heard in the community.
Yeah, I had actually calls from, I think, 4 other people who, in one fashion or another, were given trouble about wearing masks or not wanting to wear a mask while they voted. All of them, I think, are conservatives, maybe known conservatives to where they were voting. And all of them eventually capitulated. I don't think anybody wanted trouble. I didn't want any trouble, but I also wasn't willing to take any guff from these people. And the other folks I talked to eventually did put the mask on and voted with the mask on. But there was obviously some systemic issue going on in Albemarle County with this, because the word should have been out well in advance, since I had talked with or corresponded with Jake Washburn back in November on this. In fact, it's very interesting that I talked to a former elections official after all this happened, who apparently directly was in contact with the Albemarle County Registrar's Office. And about an hour and a half after I had my experience and the Registrar's Office had cleared me, another person had a similar experience at that same precinct. So either they weren't listening or something wasn't communicated clearly, but I found it interesting that they continued to persist in obstructing people in their ability to vote.
Now, this is after most of the mandatory mask mandates had lifted. The localities, though, in question had maintained an extra governmental authority over mask wearing, even beyond what Governor Northam had prescribed. Matt, does that cause a problem? And can they do that? Can they say, well, we're going to be stricter than the governor says we can be?
Well, Albemarle County had its own ordinance, and I think that ordinance had some problems, but they had actually repealed that as well. So it's unclear to me where they thought they had the authority to keep somebody from voting. And it's also an issue. We've seen this for years, and I think the Democrats have been the ones that have been talking about it, but it used to be that localities all over the South restricted people from voting for made-up reasons. Mm-hmm. And even if it was the law in these states and localities all over the South, the federal government stepped in and said, no, you can't restrict people from exercising their fundamental right to vote on these trumped-up reasons. And I think that's really what's going on here. Is we don't think there was any policy, any ordinance, any state law requiring Mr. Schilling to wear a mask. But even if there was, this is nothing more than a repeat of what we saw years ago, trying to suppress the vote for improper reasons. They clearly aren't scared of the virus. What they're scared of is Mr. Schilling exercising his right to vote.
Well, and you bring up the boogeyman, and this is why I invoked Mark Warner, is, all of these folks will start saying phrases like poll tax. Gosh, Chuck Schumer says it enough times you think he was almost a Dixiecrat. And if they scream poll tax one more time or bring up the idea of count the jelly beans, but this is really the same thing. Comply with what we decide arbitrarily first, or you can't vote.
Well, the Democrats passed a new law. They call it the Virginia Voting Rights Act, and they passed it. It took effect July the 1st, which was after Rob went to vote in early June. But this new law makes it a misdemeanor and also creates civil causes of action for voter intimidation. And so I'm really curious if this is going to be something we see more and more often, because it used to be you could be bullied, and there was very little you could do about it. Rob's going to federal court, but a lot of people, as he said, just sort of put on a mask and went about their business. Now it's a Class 1 misdemeanor to intimidate a voter in Virginia, and that voter can sue and seek damages and attorney's fees and all sorts of things in state court under this bill that the Democrats champion. And I wonder, when they start seeing that statute cause them headaches, whether they will feel as strongly about this statute that they chose to pass.
Yeah, it's always good for thee, but not for me. We're visiting with Rob Schilling and Matthew Hardin. Matthew is the attorney for Rob. Rob is a columnist, a radio show host, former elected official. They are suing Albemarle County in central Virginia over Election Day assault as well as voter intimidation on primary election day, June 8th. Guys, and maybe Rob first for this one, what implications do you think, as somebody who does this day in and day out, does this start to point out towards parents who are wondering, is my kid going to be allowed back in their elementary school classroom if I don't produce medical records to the government, which I'm sure there was a Supreme Court case saying the government can't know what you do with your doctor as Roe or something or another is in the case law, but the government seems to have forgotten that, and they want to know what you're doing with your doctor before you can come back to school.
I do think they're related, and I think it's problematic that people who are empowered to be public servants, as these elections officials, Leo Malik and the John Does 1 and 2, are supposed to be, instead, when they're given the opportunity, exercise extra constitutional powers over people. In my instance, had I not been strong and prepared to argue with them, I would have just been dissuaded from voting. Mm-hmm. I wasn't going to put a mask on, and I would have just left without casting a vote. In the instance of education, I don't know how many people are not going to be taught because some bureaucrat is exercising extra constitutional powers over them. What it really takes is for brave people to stand up, and for talented attorneys who understand the law, people like Matthew Hardin, to stand up and say, let's take a case to court and let's make an issue of this, because a lot of people just go away and we don't know what happened to them. We're not aware, and that's a dangerous situation.
And Matthew, let me focus on that for a second, because over the last 5 or so years, I think the mass of the population is becoming less and less sure that our courtrooms are a place to have our constitutional rights defended. Now, certainly President Trump appointed quite a few quote-unquote lower courts. I really don't like that phrase, because I think they're more important even than the Supreme Court at the end of the day for the number of cases they hear. But with that, a number of conservative jurists, are you comfortable that there is a good enough chance that you'll get a judge that will hear this and listen to it constitutionally rather than just under the vox populi of this is what all the cool kids are doing?
Well, it's always a concern. I think it was a cultural concern about where the courts were headed even before COVID. Mm-hmm. And then we seem to have forgotten the Constitution in the COVID mania of the last year and a half or so. So it's always a concern. I am encouraged. We've gotten a lot of good cases out of the Supreme Court lately that basically have ended this suspension of the Constitution due to COVID. And hopefully we'll get people taking voting rights seriously. This should be a bipartisan issue. This shouldn't be controversial. Everybody should want the right to vote, and that right to vote should apply to everybody, no matter your race, no matter your political affiliation, no matter your religion. And so we're hoping that lack of controversy and that this is just a fundamental constitutional issue, your right to vote, will encourage the judiciary to set a precedent here.
Is it also important, though, from your standpoint, is how the case is written, that doesn't, it is written in a buttoned-up, airtight way that the judge won't be allowed a lot of loopholes to duck out the back door of?
Oh, we always hope so. I think that one of the things that's interesting in this case is we're citing precedents from the Eastern District of Virginia, which is another federal court in Virginia, where they said that the Voting Rights Act creates a cause of action for people. So this isn't Rob Schilling just having his theories on what he should and shouldn't be able to do. This is other courts in Virginia have said the Voting Rights Act gives individuals the right to go to court. The civil rights statute that he's suing under was passed immediately after the Civil War because we knew that states and localities, again, primarily in the South, were violating people's legal rights, including their right to vote. So we're trying to make this not about Rob Schilling, but about American history and your rights as an American, everybody's rights as an American. It happened to Rob, and that's unfortunate, but it's not just Rob's case. This is going to impact all of us, and that's why it's so important.
Well, let me bring that up because, and I don't know what the count is, but the last time I spoke to either of you, the number of journalists or even quasi-journalists that have paid any attention to this is one. It's still one because that one was me. Has anyone else picked up on this story, Rob or Matt? And because people in Roanoke and Lynchburg and Richmond that are hearing this may be hearing it for the very first time, saying, "Hold it, I haven't heard anything about this story."
We did get some coverage out of Richmond on the John Fredericks program, and other than that, not so much. And you know what's fascinating, Joe, is, and I thank you for covering it here locally, is that all of these media outlets, we've got two major television stations here that do news reporting. We've got two radio stations that are in the talk business. One of them's mine, one of them's yours, and mine didn't cover it. We've got a daily newspaper who was well aware. In fact, we could track the email was opened, more than 75 times within the building over there at the daily newspaper, and nobody mentioned a word. It's almost as if there was a coordinated blackout. I mean, if you could imagine this happening to a person of color for whatever reason, being harassed in a polling place while trying to vote, I'm sure it would have exploded across the front pages of Charlottesville. But for this lockout of local media, with your exception, I'm just astounded, and I'm kind of at a loss.
Well, let me ask you this one then, because it goes beyond, and this is where it really becomes chilling to me, and it is that your own employer blacked this out as well and told you weren't allowed to cover it on your own program. And I mean, that to me is, where you start to look for collusion behind the boardroom doors and saying, why would a corporation not want to tell a story no matter what the political viewpoint of it is?
It's a very good question. I have no answers to it except that I've never encountered anything like that before. Matt was scheduled on the air with me for an interview on the topic. We've been promoting this for about a week or so, and minutes before the scheduled interview, I was called off the air in the middle of broadcasting and told that I can't say a word about this. And so, I don't know what to make of that, but it's a very unhealthy situation. And, I know even our own news department, I think, was flummoxed because they wanted to report it. Look, this is a federal lawsuit that was filed. There's video evidence here that people could see, and why there is a refusal to report on it is beyond me.
Well, I know that Lynn and John Breyer, and we all miss him, but all the folks at the Virginia Institute hold you in high regard, and I'm glad you were featured performers, if you will, at our Tuesday morning group coalition. But moreover, to the folks listening that may not have been part of it, how can they help out with this? Matt or Rob, is there a web address where people can make contributions? Because I'm sure the court clerk's time and all the time it takes to go through all these filings can't be inexpensive.
Matt?
Well, I'm going to jump in and just say the first thing that we need help with is identifying the John Doe 1 and 2. We know that people laid hands on Rob, and you can go and see it on schillingshow.com, and we don't know who they are. That's why they're named as John Doe 1 and John Doe 2. We suspect that people, especially in Albemarle and Charlottesville, likely know who these people are. You can see enough of their faces. You can probably identify them, but we don't know who they are yet. So the number one thing we need is for folks to go and watch that video and see if you recognize these people, because it would really help us out going forward if we knew who exactly they were. And we're not taking monetary donations right now because we think that this is an important issue, and I'm donating my time to it. But I'd encourage everybody to follow schillingshow.com because he'll update people on what's going on. And he's going to need help going forward. I'm not sure what help he's going to need, but schillingshow.com will be the place to find out about the suit. And if you want to assist, I'm sure you'll find out how you can do that there.
Well, if voting rights mean anything to anyone, and it seems like, as you said, Matt, should be a bipartisan issue. Thank you for sharing all of this with us. Rob, it's good to catch up, and Matthew as well, good to catch up. And you guys, keep your eyes open and heads on a swivel.
Joe, thank you so much for hosting us today.
Not at all. Matt, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Joe. You have a good one.
Coming up next, Jessica Anderson, Executive Director of Heritage Action for America, critical race theory, critical theory, e-books, and what parents should be watching for now that the left begins telling us, no, that's just a conspiracy theory. Didn't you hear what Terry McAuliffe said? Next on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.